We are super excited to have you out here again. As Jason said, this is your meeting. This is about you. So while we have actually taken all those ideas from the first phase and started to put those into some concept plans, as the video described, the idea is that what we try to do is kind of pick up on the key themes, the priorities that were expressed by the community. And a lot of times there's different flavors of those. They could come about in different ways. And so what we try to do is package those into three concepts that generally work together individually. But what we'd like you to do is focus less on saying, well, option 2 is my favorite, and more so on what are the important elements that you like about each one, or maybe there's something missing. We're still open to new ideas here too. So if you think there's a different idea than is expressed in one of the three concepts, you can let us know that too. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and some of you I saw stopping by this poster on your way in, but there was a poster in the entryway, and if you get a chance, check it out. It's basically just an existing rendering of the corridor, but it's interesting to see sort of the scale of different things, the relationship to each other, the lack of relationship in some cases, which was one of the key themes that we heard from people in some of the earlier conversations and earlier meetings. So when we're looking at the existing conditions, it may be helpful for you, and I realize it takes a couple extra steps and maybe another stop at the sanitation station, but it could be helpful to compare what's on the concepts to what's on the ground today. So that's a reference point for you. But we did want to point out a couple of things. In the West Zone, it's largely civic today, largely disconnected today, if you think about the circulation. So that creates some unique aspects, both positive and negative, to that area of the corridor. The eastern end of the corridor, obviously we have the new acquisition, which adds a huge opportunity as kind of the original impetus of this larger discussion. But what we're identifying is we have some great pieces in isolation, but it's not really working together all that well today. And I think that's a lot of what we heard through the visioning phase is, I think Steve in the video mentioned it was about kind of the experience and how you feel along the corridor. And right now it doesn't feel like a single corridor. It feels like kind of a series of experiences or places that are disconnected. And so whether you're talking about the size of this facility and the parking lots surrounding it, thinking about the creek access, the new facility that we have, a couple of things that we highlighted were the disjointed and separate kind of nature of the corridor. Looking at established parks, as far as the way that they're utilized, they've largely reached their capacity. There's a lot of demands, particularly in the summertime, formally and informally, for events, for the demands on the creek of out-of-town visitors, tubing and otherwise. And so right now I think we're experiencing that, right? Like we're at the brink, maybe beyond the brink in some cases, and so we need to make sure that we're accommodating that flexibility as was mentioned in the video. The new land acquisition is an inefficient use of space from a civic perspective because it's largely surrounded by parking, right? And so we're thinking about creating a civic space, a place that's accessible, inviting to the community, and creates a connection to the creek. It doesn't really do that today. So the move to rethink that portion of the corridor is key. And then connectivity in the West Zone is relatively limited, as I mentioned. This slide actually just shows in color the different uses along the corridor, and we'll get to the concepts momentarily, I promise. But an important piece is it is largely public today. I think it, again, because of how it's broken up, it doesn't necessarily feel like a civic campus or the heart of Golden today, but it is important to note that we have largely civic uses along here today, and that's one of the things that we heard about was, well, yeah, there may be a benefit of sprinkling in a few, kind of activators like a restaurant or something like that to maybe get some eyes on the creek, eyes on the open space and civic uses, maybe after hours, on weekends. The idea of keeping it pretty civic was pretty core to all concepts that you'll see this evening. On the eastern end, we have a little bit of residential and commercial use, so it's yellow and red buildings there. Oh, an important piece here. Again, it's pretty obvious to you all, I'm sure, but if you look just outside the boundary to the north of the south, it's largely residential and largely single-family homes. And so I think that's something to be cognizant of, is sort of what is that transition and how do we create an amenity for the nearby neighbors as well as the larger community. We're not just planning and thinking about this in isolation. The building use, already mentioned, so I won't hit that again. But again, this idea that it's relatively disparate and disconnected is key. And then the natural systems. While we do have a relatively connected trail network along the creek, relatively, there are some spots obviously where there's some gaps. The tree canopy is spotty along the corridor, so there's an opportunity to kind of fill that in, bring in some more natural systems. A chance I think here, and you'll see this in the concepts and I'll highlight it, to frame the public space as an open space with the buildings. Right now, yes, we have some designated park space, but the creek corridor itself is largely kind of, it's almost a leftover space from the buildings that got developed and built along there. And what we want to do is really think about flip that on its head. Think about the public space, the community space, the natural systems, actually being the unifying element that sort of organizes the entire corridor, and then we stitch things to that to make a real place. So I probably should advance these slides before I say everything on the first slide with the photos. So one important note here, though, is that there's a 100-year floodplain that covers a good portion of the corridor. It's most expansive in this kind of central area, central zone. But it does impact the western and eastern ends of the corridor as well. So it's something that doesn't prohibit construction within that floodplain, but we do want to be cognizant of the type of development that we do there, making sure that it's not exacerbating the situation and hopefully can improve it. The tree canopy I mentioned, and then we do have a lot of other impervious surfaces. So related to the floodplain, related to the community values of sustainability and resiliency, we do want to think about how do we approach that. And then circulation, as I said, a lot of times a corridor along a creek or river or waterway, naturally as it intersects that waterway, there's limited connectivity. There's only so many crossings. In this particular situation, we're limited east and west as well. And so in all of these concepts, we're thinking about, well, what are the implications then on the need, whether you're walking, biking, taking transit, coming by car, of how you get around. How do you get to this space, the civic corridor? How do you move through it, around it? And are we creating undue impacts on certain parts of the corridor and potentially the neighbors and not on others with certain elements? So that's something we'd love to hear about tonight. There are potential future bike lanes and bike routes connecting to the corridor and across the corridor, which is good. But there's little to no pedestrian infrastructure providing connections across Clear Creek today. So we basically have the two bridges today. So quickly, some inspiration. And this is basically your input captured in images, or our attempt to do so. You can tell us how well we did. So gathering in open space, a really key focus on parkland. And different elements, thinking about how to program that space and making sure that it's flexible for programmed events as well as less formal play and activation. Thinking about greenways, how do you really activate green space and create a continuous corridor? It might kind of ebb and flow, right? Maybe it's just a trail in some sections, it kind of opens up and is a large park in others, but how does that create a continuous greenway along the Clear Creek corridor? Thinking about plazas and how can those actually complement some of the open space, but also the buildings. And that was something that people talked about is, the way that we utilize our parks today, like Parfit Park, we put a lot of strain on the park with having events there. There's a lot of demand on that. And so is there a better public space, maybe a plaza, that can accommodate that foot traffic, setting up booths, maybe there's even utilities there, water, electricity, to support some of those uses. Festival streets can be a way to do that in a flexible nature so that they can provide circulation, whether it's just pedestrian and bikes, maybe it is for cars or maybe emergency vehicles only, but at certain times they can provide that event space. Looking at trail connectivity, and there's the natural trail elements which we do really well already along the corridor, but we think there's a way to complement that maybe and supplement with some a little more urban trail network. So we don't have to be a one trail pony. if you will. And so maybe there's actually supplement in this sort of this weaving of the pedestrian and trail experience along the corridor. Looking at bridges, it can be an opportunity if we are to reinvest or rethink any of the bridges, reinvest in or rethink any of the bridges to create an iconic element. And I think a component of that might be, well, how does it serve a circulation function, which is, its primary function, but how can it also maybe be an event space, maybe add identity and branding to the corridor. Thinking about amphitheaters, this was one that it's really jumped out at us in looking at all the community input. Not only an indoor performing arts space, but a outdoor performing arts space of some sort to accommodate community events. So those can be done in a variety of ways. You'll see them located in all the concepts in different places. Looking at the creek access, so formalizing what is already happening, doing that in a more constructive way, a way that protects the corridor and protects the community, but also creating new opportunities for the community to access the creek for a variety of uses. And then play being integrated throughout was something that we heard about. This should be a place for families and children, and not just for young adults and people jogging or biking along the corridor. So, all that said, again, you can take me aside during the rest of the meeting and tell me how I did with those photos and capturing your vision elements, but here's the preliminary concepts. We're going to give you a little overview right now. Mark's then going to describe the exercises that we have for you this evening, and then we want to let you loose, because the real interaction, the real value in this process is going to be you providing input, you asking questions, us having dialogue. So, but we did think it'd be beneficial to give you a little bit of a framing kind of overview first. So the preliminary concepts, what you're going to see in all of them from a public space perspective, public facility perspective, is they're consistent. So that means that there's a city hall, a new city hall element in each. Sometimes the footprint is of different size, the height of the building is kind of assumed to be different based on how much space it takes up. But the idea of repurposing this space for other uses, rebuilding a city hall, and combining other features into that to create a more efficient government structure, and as well as create some efficiency in terms of the construction itself. Several of the concepts have police co-located with the city hall, but you'll see one where there is a new police facility separate from. Fire station, we've either expanded or created a new fire station in all concepts, so there's an investment in fire and safety. Parking is addressed differently in the different concepts. So one concept relies on parking lots almost exclusively, and you'll see the impacts then. If we go to a structure, one or more, we create more room to do more open space. So it's a trade-off, of course, because then you have to drive up the ramp, and there's an extra cost associated, obviously, with structured parking, but it does create more space on the corridor. So efficient use, but more costly, of course. The library, the Jefferson County Library, they are very interested in being part of this overall visioning concept. They want to hear what the community has to say. And so we've explored different options for the library, particularly co-locating them with some of the other cultural uses. Looking at the museum, performing arts, and visitor center. So you'll see all of those are either additional investments in existing facilities. There's one where visitor center, for instance, it's a reinvestment in the existing facility or a new facility in every concept. So that's consistent.
In the performing arts, was that a building?
Yes. So there is an amphitheater that we were just calling out buildings right there, but there's an amphitheater in each concept as well. But the performing arts on that list was referring to a building. Okay, so really quickly, 3 concepts. First one we're calling civic, campus, and cultural core. The reason is that there's kind of 2 distinct areas in this concept, and focusing on creating a cultural core that includes the museum, the library, and some of those component performing arts center, and then more of the traditional civic functions of city hall, police, those elements in a different portion of the corridor. So in this west portion, you can actually, and my laser pointer is not going to work, but in the right hand side of the screen there, you can see near the bridge, the existing pedestrian bridge, a focus on the performing arts, the library, and then as we move east, I'm going to flip to the next slide. You can see them performing arts, and then we actually flip the museum to the other side of the creek, but in that same location, and introduce a restaurant adjacent to the new visitor center. So that's the idea, again, of testing. Could there be one or two kind of activators outside the civic uses, which is helpful nights, weekends, that sort of thing. Not an essential component, obviously, to this, and that's why they weren't on that initial list. As you move eastward, though, what we're showing then is relatively little to no change at Parford Park, Vanover Park, but then a large expanded naturalized open space connected to Vanover Park. So it could become part of that park, it could be an additional space, with then City Hall and police adjacent to that. There's a parking structure in this scenario, and then the fire department is also kind of located on this eastern end. So big level or big high level concepts for this first one, creating two distinct kind of clusters of buildings. Cultural in the kind of the western central area of the corridor, and then more traditional civic uses, City Hall, police and fire on the east. So we have those centralized, the arts and tourism component, as we said. One of the trade-offs with this, I think, it's interesting how you look at it. You'll see in the other two concepts, we have larger open spaces. In this particular concept, you end up with that one larger naturalized open space south of the new City Hall. But then it's kind of this interstitial, kind of smaller pocket parks, smaller parking areas, more distributed throughout that cultural campus. A creekside amphitheater that could be used by the library and the Performing Arts Center. We heard that story time is just overloaded all the time, and so we're in our vision, it's nice out all the time, and people can do outdoor story time. A parking garage near the Civic building, as we said, enhanced trail connections and accessibility along Clear Creek, and using Water Street there too. So if I go back for a second, one thing to point out here is Water Street is enhanced and becomes that kind of flexible street, accommodating pedestrian, bike traffic, but could also be used for events at different times, and kind of terminating at the City Hall. The next concept is Eastern Intensity and Central Parks. So as it suggests, we packed as much as we possibly could in the eastern portion of the corridor. And we actually heard this. This is one of the kind of we call this site planning, what we're kind of showing you here. From a site planning perspective, we heard from the community, one of the kind of stronger ideas was, well, why don't we just pack in as much as we can down there and kind of reserve as much open space in the central portion of the corridor as we can. So we explored an option with that. So here, if you look on the western end, the idea would be that Lions Park would get some kind of reinvestment, reconfiguration. There'd be a festival, kind of flex parking space adjacent to that. Maybe relocating tennis courts, adding nature play. Those are really high level master plan things. The actual design of those parks would come later. But the concept of you could introduce new elements. You could reconfigure some things and make it maybe function a little bit better is the kind of core piece of that. As we move eastward, we begin to get into facilities. And so retaining the existing fire department, existing visitor center being unchanged in this scenario. And then as you move eastward further, we're relying on a trail connection along the creek to kind of get through that piece where we had Water Street as a festival street previously. And then you can see packed in on that eastern end, we have plenty of parking, a bunch of that is structured to support City Hall combined with police, a performing arts center, and library. And in this scenario, we were thinking that the Performing Arts Center, if people like that idea of a kind of a restaurant or wine bar or something, maybe in the Performing Arts Center would be the opportunity there. So I think I hit on most of these points pretty well. So we'll move to the last one here. So we have civic anchors in distinct destinations. So if you think about what I mentioned about the open spaces being an organizing element, in that first concept, it's more these little pocket parks, kind of stitching everything together. In the second concept, we packed as much as we could on the eastern end to create a large central park and open space network. In this option, it's more medium distributed open spaces, and then the civic facilities kind of follow suit. So On the western end, we have a rethought kind of Lions Park open space with expanded parking options to support the permanent uses as well as temporary kind of tourism uses in the summer. Looking at library facility, a new facility just west of where it is today, expanded parking there. Looking at a flexible open space of, again, more of a medium size in that central portion. You can see between the performing arts and library on there in the left half of the screen. An important component of this one is actually that we're really framing Washington Ave on this one. And so it's sort of an extension of, Golden's Main Street, sort of across the bridge heading north, which could be helpful kind of longer term, maintaining that civic spine or corridor east and west, but then allowing for the extension of Washington Ave, kind of those Main Street type of functions further to the north. We then have Water Street would have some multimodal improvements here, kind of providing that east-west connectivity and connecting to, again, expanded naturalized open space with City Hall, a standalone police department and fire department on the east end. So those are some of the key components highlighted here on the slide again. We do end up with the arts and education hub with the way things are kind of laid out there. And then also we have plenty of flexible outdoor space, that one kind of medium-sized centralized space, one of the distinguishing factor of this third concept plan. So I'm going to turn over to Mark here, but we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A and sort of exploratory questions and discussion on the concepts as we move around the room. But any really high-level things about like understanding sort of the organization of the concepts? Otherwise, we have people stationed at every one of these concepts which are around the room, and we can answer specific questions. Yeah.
The costs with different options vary greatly, or do you have an idea?
Yeah, so we did a very, 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 very preliminary cost estimating exercise, and it's all within sort of a margin of error that's relatively, or they're all within the same realm of possibility, yeah. There will get much deeper into cost moving forward as we kind of put the different pieces together, but as of right now, cost is not a big differentiator between the concepts. I think the way that we would approach it is looking at phasing over time. So, what was that?
What is the cost? What are your very, very basic?
Yeah, I don't actually have it with me right now. But.
Maybe you should repeat the question.
The question is about the cost. One, it's super preliminary, and two, I actually don't know it off the top of my head, but we will definitely following up in future meetings about that. Yes, sir.
To what extent, when you built the three different scenarios, did you actually, well, I saw that there's parking lots and you have some parking spaces. To what extent do you try to predict the numbers of new people that will be coming and how they will actually access these different parks? Because I keep seeing kind of 10th, 9th, 8th kind of in this grayed out shadowy area, but we know that's how a lot of people access the creek today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're actually creating, in each scenario, there's at least a new connection, if not multiple connections. So, for instance, I think it's in concept 1 where we're actually rethinking the pedestrian bridge and reinvesting so that that could actually be, when Washington Avenue is closed, that could provide vehicular circulation. On the parking question specifically, right now we sort of designed it to code, thinking about maximum use when, so with the co-location of facilities, one of the issues is that we tried to co-locate to allow shared parking solutions, so you're not over parking, right? Like we don't want a big parking lot along the corridor with just a couple of civic facilities, but there are times when multiple facilities are going to be activated. So that's, as of right now, we plan for sort of the mandated amount when there's multiple activation happening at once. As we move forward in the concepts, we can drill down much further into the parking needs and demands. 2 more, and then I'm going to turn over to Mark because we can address a lot of this as we go around the room. So here.
Do any of these concepts envision a place for the farmers market specifically?
Yeah, so actually in every single one of the concepts we have some sort of a festival flex space. So it plays out differently in the different concepts. But look for that, and you can ask the staff and consultant team members that are around the room. They can help point that out to you. But there is a festival flex space identified in each concept. Yeah, and then back in the corner there.
I feel like I'm at a parking convention, you know, a lot of talk about parking. What about alternative ways to access this space, such as, again, bus routes, shuttle routes for the community, also bike parking, things like that, of course, with packing.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So I didn't hit on a lot of the common elements across the concepts, but increased bike connections, increased transit connections, and planning for that eventuality, hopefully, of a more regional transit connection on the east end of the corridor. And then enhanced transit stops. We've actually already talked about, and taking some cues from the community input, a community circulator that could work in this area and connect to downtown, the core as well. And then to your point, thinking about other micro-mobility options, whether that's traditionally bikes and where you park those, or other ways that people might get around moving forward. As everyone knows, it's hard to anticipate where we're going, excuse the pun, when it comes to transportation, but we are going to try to build in that flexibility for sure. And then I said two more, but you've diligently had your hand up, sir. So last one, then we're turning it over to Mark.
So my question is, how did you define community? This is a community park. Who are you drawn to?
Who are we drawing to it?
Yeah, I mean, right, I've lived down in the neighborhood for
Yeah.
a long, long time, and one of the struggles we've had is that we built a water park that brought people from the region, not just from the town, and at times we feel overrun by people coming from out of our community.
Yeah.
We consider our community. So how did you define community?
So the spaces that we were creating, I think, are sort of, they're not necessarily responding to a specific audience yet, but where we have applied any sort of programmatic elements in the open spaces, those have been community oriented in terms of resident golden oriented. So if you look at the one that probably does the most of that would be the one right behind you, the Central Park option, and that particular option shows basically sort of family-oriented, resident-oriented uses. Other aspects of that I think we need to kind of tackle as we move through this. For better or worse, Golden is a destination, right? Like it is. And so we need to, one, accommodate the amount of that is going to happen regardless. And then to your point, we don't want to exacerbate the situation. So it is definitely something that we're hearing loud and clear. And so we need to improve the situation, not make it worse. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. And we're going to get a little overview of some of our exercises, and then we'll turn you loose.
Perfect. Thanks. So we're almost to the fun part, just a couple more slides to go. This tiny font is not meant to be read. It is our general analysis of all the input they received the last two workshops we had here, all the visioning workshops. We asked y'all to rank evaluation criteria. So when we got to this phase, we knew what metrics were most important when we're starting to... There's a microphone here. So we knew how to evaluate these concepts against one another. Obviously, there's programmatic elements, which Jay was noting, that are relatively consistent across the board. We didn't want the program to be the differentiator. We wanted the evaluation criteria, which y'all told us was most important to be that first tier of evaluation, knowing that there's a lot of other truthing that goes on when we're looking at the evolution or the synthesis of these different concepts. There's a lot of work still to be done there. Of all of the different evaluation criteria that we had presented to y'all, 3 rose to the top. There was a 4th that was about fiscal responsibility, which again, very important. It'll be part of the evaluation as we move forward to your question earlier. But from a physical program component, when we're starting to look at how do we weigh these against each other, from a design standpoint, open space and natural features was your top comment on not just the evaluation criteria exercise, but on online surveys, pretty much any form of input that y'all had. Open space rose to the top pretty quickly. Civic, cultural, government priorities, thinking about this as a civic campus, as a cultural core. The concept one itself, titled pretty much after this evaluation criteria. We understand that those programmatic elements are important. So making sure that as they are organized in different scenarios here tonight, that we're doing so in the way that best suits the communities and the city's needs. And lastly, the flexibility of the space, both indoor and outdoor, thinking about can we accommodate the farmer's market when, at different times of the day or in different areas, thinking about those temporary uses that support some of the more physical, probably rigid components, which will be the buildings themselves. That's the evaluation criteria. There's going to be an exercise about that out in the hallway after we wrap up in here. Before we get to that, I just wanted to circle back around to some earlier points. Everything that's been generated thus far has been based on y'all's input, and we've received a lot of input so far. Just a quick summary of the 3 different community open houses we've had so far. Constant touch points with city council, a big internet presence on pretty much every form of social media. I had to get a Twitter account just to be part of this project, so there's a lot of touch points that we've had so far, and it's pretty exciting to see the level of enthusiasm and concern about what happens for the future of Golden. There's more touch points to come. This is the 3rd of 8 kind of workshops in this series, so we'll be repeating this, as Jason mentioned, again in a month. So if you have friends who weren't able to make it, please tell them to come next go around, and again, there's going to be online replication of all these. So the 3 activities tonight, they're the preliminary concepts emoji critique. So we have our background here. We have Civic Campus and Cultural Core, Eastern Intensity and Central Parks, and then Civic Anchors and Distinct Destinations. For those particular boards, we have sets of stickers. We have the heart smiley face emoji, which means good. I think you did a good job on this one, or I like this idea. There's the kind of emoji. We got close, not quite there yet. And then there's the shock of terror emoji. We had the little poop emoji, but we took that one out. It was too much for a public meeting. So we're asking that y'all critique the design elements, the key elements, the precedent images. If you can, try to keep the stickies off of the plan itself, because it'll get pretty cluttered pretty quick. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to understand and really, so maybe just adjacent to the concepts or adjacent to the title. That's the first exercise. So that's the plan themselves. We think about, oh yes, and we know y'all are fond of Post-its and have used them quite efficiently in prior community workshops. So we brought them back. Again, we have a whole table of sticky notes in the back, so if there's something that we missed entirely, write it down, stick it on that concept, let us know, make sure that we can hear your full opinion on those. The next exercise are the concept inspiration photo build, and how we've done this in the past, we've come in with, hey, we've showed the precedent images, right, that were based on kind of our thought of what you've told us so far in terms of inspiration for concepts. We went through a bunch of pretty pictures up there. That was kind of our take on it. We want to hear y'all's take specifically now. So we have most of those photos scattered about. There's some fun ones in there too, so let me know if you find one. About what you actually think about gathering in open space, what you think about circulation and mobility, what you think about public amenities. Not really focused on the architecture at this point in time, really focusing on the space that stitches them together and really what ties all this together as design concepts, as key elements. So if you like a picture, we have a bunch of, we'll have staff up here, consultants, we have sticky dots that we'll give you. We'll give you 3 to start with. If you're feeling really zealous, let us know, we can give you more. But if you like something, go ahead and grab that photo, put a sticky dot on it, and we'll put it on the board. If your friend sees something that they like as well that's already on the board, we have other stickies, just put a green sticky on that, like, hey, yeah, let's keep that going. If there's something up there that you don't see yet, try and find it in the mass and then get that up there. There's something you don't like, maybe wait till the person who put it up there walks away and then you can put a red dot on it. So that's this general exercise up here. So we're building that kind of precedent inspiration board and kind of truthing ourselves to make sure we generally got it right from our first stab at it. Once we've gotten through these exercises here, our last one's going to be out in the hallway. It's the evaluation criteria, which I just touched on. Those top 3, focusing on civic responsibility, open space, flexibility. We have the different key elements. If y'all look back to the illustrative plan boards behind you, there's 12 in total. There's a lot of elements to these different designs, but tried to distill it down to the 4 big ones. And then we wanted to rank those against the evaluation criteria, which you said were most important. And so we're going to be, did we achieve it? Did we not achieve it? Did we completely miss the mark? So we have an exercise out there, which we can talk in greater detail about at the station if there are any more questions. That is the last thing I have to say. As a reminder, we have distributed hand sanitizer everywhere, so there's that.